Okay, hi everybody today. Today we're going to combine a couple concepts together. So we are graphing linear equations again, but this time they're not in slope-intercept form. So remember, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. And remember, that's the reason why they call it slope. Oops, let me use a highlighter. They call it slope because the slope, the m represents the rise and the run, how steep it is, right? And the b represents where it crosses the y-axis, so the intercept. So that's the reason why they call it slope-intercept. And if we have an equation in slope-intercept form, we can use the y-intercept and the slope to graph very quickly and accurately. So if you look at example number 1, you can see that this is not in slope-intercept form. So first we're going to use our algebra skills to get it into slope-intercept form, and then we can graph it. So it's a we have to do a couple different things. So let's look at that. Let's do the first one. So let's just focus on getting it in y form. So remember, we want y by itself, right? And we did this the other day. So this should be like the third day that you've practiced this skill of rewriting in slope-intercept form, right? So maybe you could stop the video and try to do it yourself, right? So actually stop the video and see if you can do it. So remember, we want to isolate the term that has the y in it. So we want to undo subtracting 3x by adding 3, not 3. We're undoing the negative 3x's. We have to add 3x's. It's really important that you're not leaving out that x. Completely different. And remember, whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do the same thing to the other side. So we also have to add 3x to the other side. So now what do we have on each side of the equal sign, right? Line up your equals to kind of keep the sides neat and organized. A negative 3x and a positive 3x, doesn't that make no x's, right? 0 x's, so we don't have any more x's. So now we just have 2y on the side. And then remember, you can only combine terms that are like each other. This term is just a constant, whereas this term has a variable. So these are not like terms, so you cannot combine them, right? Not like terms. So you cannot add them together. So all we can say is we have a 3x and a minus 2 is going to come up as a subtract 2, right? Then we can undo the multiplication by 2 by dividing by 2. Now we can do one big long one like that. But remember, that big long division bar really means we're dividing both of them. So that means we're dividing both of them by 2. So it's better to actually show that you're dividing both of them by 2. So you really want to do it individually. But that's what that notation means. So again, if you did this, if you did 2y equals 3x minus 2, and you said you're going to divide by 2, so I'm dividing both of these by 2, it's the same thing. So it is the same thing if you see it somewhere else, but you do have to divide them individually eventually. So y equals, and then 3 divided by 2 is just 3 halves, right? That can't be reduced. And then x goes in the middle of the fraction, right? And negative 2 divided by 2, remember this is just a division fact. This is just negative 2 divided by 2, and we should know our basic division facts, and that is negative 1, so that's minus 1. So now we have it in slope-intercept form. And isn't the m, right, the coefficient of the x is your m, so we know our slope is 3 halves, and we know our y-intercept is the b, and the b in this problem is negative 1. So we know that our b is, it's going to cross at negative 1. And so now we can actually graph it. So let's see what we got. Okay, so let's graph it. So we have, remember on Nearpod, we want you to do the y-intercept in red. So we want a point it crosses the y-axis at negative 1. So we want the y-intercept in red. Remember the y-axis. And then we have to use the slope, which is, remember that it's up 3 and over 2, and it's positive, so we're going to run 2. And so it's positive, it has to go uphill. So from this, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, new point. Up 3, 1, 2, 3, right 2, new point. And then go back to the y-intercept, down 3, 1, 2, 3, and left 2, new point. So, and then normally we would draw a line. So normally we would take a nice ruler and draw a line. The problem when we're using Nearpod is when you draw that line, we can't see the points that you plotted, and we want to be able to see the points that you plotted. So if it's paper pencil, yeah, we want you to draw the line with a nice thin line with nice big bold points. But since it's really difficult to see your points, we've asked you not to draw the line and just draw the points for now. And remember to put the y-intercept in red. And then when you use your rise and your run, put those in black. So you can see it went up 3 over 2, up 3 over 2, down 3 over 2. So your final answer should look like this in Nearpod. Right, so that should be your final answer. Okay, let's look at the next one. In the next one, again, we have to get it in Y form first. So we want to isolate the term that has the Y. We want to keep the 4Y there. So we want to isolate and undo the X. So since that's 1x and it's positive, we're going to subtract 1x to both sides. And that gives us 4y. Remember, these are not like terms because one term has an x and the other term does not. So I've got a negative x plus a 12. Then I'm going to undo multiplying by 4 by dividing by 4. So I have to divide both of them by 4. And that gives me y equals. Now remember, this is not 4x. So a lot of kids are going to say it's negative 4x plus 3. That's not correct. Because remember, there's a 1 in front of that. There's a coefficient of 1. So that is actually not correct. So be careful with that. That is actually negative, right? Because a negative divided by a positive is a negative 1/4. And then the x should go right in the middle. And then doesn't this mean 12 divided by 4? Isn't that just a division fact? And what is 12 divided by 4? Isn't that positive 3? So isn't that plus 3? So now that we have it in slope-intercept form, can't we see that the slope is going to be negative 1/4, no x, and the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So the plain old b is where it crosses the y-axis. So we know it's going to cross up here at positive 3. And we want you to put that in red. So the y-intercept is 3. Now remember, the slope is negative, so that we have to make sure that we're going downhill. So downhill is going this direction is downhill. And we have to rise 1 and run 4. So up 1 and then 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left. Up 1, 1, 2, 3, 4-ish. Down 1 and then right 1, 2, 3, 4. And down 1, right 1, 2, 3, 4. And you should already know how to do this part, right? Again, we don't want you to draw the line. But can you see that I went up 1 and over 4 and up 1 and over 4? See, that's not very, and it's going downhill. Right? We're going downhill. So your final answer, you don't want to draw a line. So I don't want you to draw a line. We just want the point so that we can see where you plotted your rise and your run, and we can count and make sure that you're doing things right. So that's what your Nearpod should look like. And don't forget on Nearpod, when you rewrite it, you're going to have to use scratch paper, right? So you're going to use scratch paper to do your work. So this is your work. And then you're going to type this into Nearpod, and then you're going to graph it on Nearpod. Okay, let's try another one. So why don't you pause the tape and try solving for y for both of these problems, and then let's see how you do, right? Why don't you try that? Okay, so if you came back, remember we want to get y by itself because we want to rewrite it in slope-intercept form. And slope-intercept form means we have y all by itself on one side. So we want to find the term that has the y, and we want to isolate that. So we want to leave that term there. So we want to undo the adding 2x. So we're going to undo that by subtracting 2x. And whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, right, you got to also do the same thing to the other side. So now what do we have? I'm going to move it over here a little bit to give it a little bit of room. So now we have no more x's, but we still have a 1/3 y. And then on the other side, these are not like terms because this term has just a plain old number that's called a constant. And then this term has a variable, so those are not like terms. So you cannot combine them. So all we can say is we've got a negative 2x and a -1 on this side. And I'm going to fix that a little bit. Now I've got to undo multiplying by 1/3. So I could divide both sides, everything by 1/3. So I could do that, but then that gets a little weird and, extra work. So when you're multiplying by a fraction, isn't it faster just to use fraction busters at this point? I wouldn't use fraction busters at the beginning. And wouldn't I just multiply this by the reciprocal, right? Aren't these reciprocals? And then I have to multiply both of these by 3. Remember, that's how you say that you're going to multiply both by 3. When you multiply reciprocals, you always get 1, so that's y equals. And then you have to multiply both of these, so that means we have to multiply 3 times negative 2x, which is negative 6x. And then again, 3 times -1, which is negative 3. So now we've got it in slope-intercept form. So what's the slope? And what's the y-intercept? Right? Did you say the slope is -6? Not negative 6x, negative 6. And isn't it cross the y-axis? The b is negative 3. So doesn't that mean it crosses the y-axis at negative 3? And don't we want you to put a red dot on the y-intercept? Now, the slope is -6, so it's got to go downhill. And then can't 6 be written as 6/1? Isn't 6 divided by 1 the same as 6? So we're going to rise 6 and run 1. Some of you were doing 1/6 when it said the slope was 6. No, that's completely different. 6 and 1/6 are not the same number. But 6 and 6 divided by 1, do 6 divided by 1 on a calculator. What are you going to get? You're going to get 6. What's 7 divided by 1? 7. What's 8 divided by 1? 8. Right? So these are the same thing. They're not equivalent, so be careful. So we have to do 6 up 6/1. So from here, we're going to do up 6, right 1, and then up 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up 1. It's a little bit off the paper. And then down below, we're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/1. So remember, I went back to the y-intercept, and then I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I went over 1, and that's my new point. I went up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I went over 1. There's my new point. I went up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I went over 1. There's my new point. So I used the slope of 6, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1 to make my new points. So this is what your final answer should look like in Desmo, or in Nearpod, sorry. And you should have the equation also typed in. So don't forget to also type into Nearpod the equation in slope-intercept form. That's part of the homework assignment for tonight, is you must type this in, and then you have to then graph it. Okay, why don't you do example 4? Maybe pause it and see if you can do example 4. Okay, let's come back. Don't we want to get y by itself? And isn't y already on the left-hand side all by itself? So don't I just need to... Now, some people go, shouldn't you add 2y? Well, let's see what happens when you add 2y. If you line up your equals, isn't a negative 2y and a positive 2y means no y's? Doesn't it mean you have nothing on this side? And here we have y's and x's and -4. Those are complete, they're not like terms. So I would have a 2y, a plus an x, and a -4 on this side. That didn't do us any good. So we already got y by itself, so we don't want to do that. That does not make sense. We already have all the y's by themselves. So now we want to undo multiplying by -2 by dividing by -2, right? We're going to undo the multiplication because now we want to undo the coefficient and we want it to be 1y. So we have to multiply everybody by -2. Got to watch your signs. Remember, same signs. It's a positive. Different signs. It's a negative, but remember that's for the multiplication and division sign rules. That's not true for adding and subtracting. That's only true when you're multiplying and dividing. We're supposed to know those rules really well. Maybe get a 3x5 card and write it on a 3x5 card and have it next to you when you're doing your homework. Remember, there's a coefficient of 1 there. So the slope is actually a positive divided by a negative, right? The signs are different. So a positive divided by a negative is a -1/2. And the x goes on the side in the middle. And then a negative divided by a negative, the signs are the same, so it's a positive. And then remember, this is just a 4 divided by 2 fact. Right? That's just a fancy way of writing division. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that's what you should type into Nearpod. That's your slope-intercept form. Right? You have to rewrite it into slope-intercept form, and you have to type that into Nearpod. Now we're going to use the slope, which is -1/2, and the y-intercept, which is +2. Right? Y-intercept is +2, and the slope is -1/2. So we've asked you to put for the y-intercept, we want you to put a dot that is red. And then for the other ones, we want you to use black. So it's negative again. Sorry, I just did these problems in my head and didn't think about they all happen to be negative. Remember, if it's positive, your line should go uphill. And if it's negative, your line should go downhill. So we need to go downhill because it's negative. Again, sorry, I gave you another negative one. So up 1 over 2, right? Rise, run. And we have to go downhill. We have to be going downhill. So up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2, down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2. So you need to be plotting lots of points, not just 2 points. Can you see that I went up 1 and over 2? Then I went up 1 and I went over 2, and then I went up 1 and over 2, and that's how I got, and then I went down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2. So your final answer should be this without these things. I just did it just to help people who are still struggling with, how are you getting those points? It's easier in the real classroom to kind of show you. Okay, so that's what your answer should look like, and you have to type this in. So do your scratch work off on the side of a piece of paper for tonight's homework. Okay, hope you're successful. Talk to you later.